Welcome to the American Diversity Report podcasts and the Black-Jewish dialogues. Today, I will be your host, Deborah Levine, also editor of the American Diversity Report. And with me will be two amazing experts in the issue of education and equity. Before I introduce them, I would like to thank the partners we have for our Black-Jewish dialogues, including the Chattanooga News Chronicle, Mizpah Congregation, Jewish Federation of Greater Chattanooga, and CURB, Citizens Upbraiding Racism in Bermuda. Thank you all for joining the American Diversity Report today. And let's hear about our speakers. Ardena Garth Hicks. She is a Hamilton County native and practicing attorney who is the 2020 Legal Aid Society Pro Bono Attorney of the Year. She is a member of the Hamilton County Partnership Network Board of Directors, appointed by Tennessee Education Commissioner Candace McQueen. The partnership's charge is to review the progress of the 5 schools in the partnership network, which have been deemed priority schools by the state, and make recommendations to the Hamilton County Board of Education and network leadership to support students' growth and development. She is also president of Chattanooga Endeavors, Inc., a nonprofit organization which advocates for the interests of citizens repatriating from incarceration. Ardena previously was special prosecutor for child abuse cases with the Hamilton County District Attorney's Office. She served as Hamilton County's first elected district public defender from 1990 to 2014, 3 successive 8-year terms, having been appointed to the newly created position by Governor Ned McWhirter in 1989. Ardena graduated as an Ooltewah High School valedictorian, earned her bachelor's degree at Middle Tennessee State University, and earned her Juris Doctor degree from the University of Kansas. And there is also an article about Ardena, about her past, on the American Diversity Report if you wish to know more. Now, let's hear about Dr. Jill Keegan Levine. She is the Chief of Innovation and Choice for Tennessee's Hamilton County Schools, a district of over 45,000 students. Prior to this role, she served as the Chief of the Opportunity Zone, a learning community focused on the turnaround of the 12 highest needs schools in the district, as well as serving previously as the Chief Academic Officer of the school district. After graduating from Wellesley College with a double major in music and history, Jill began her career teaching 3rd grade and directing musical theater productions in the New Orleans public schools. She was the principal of Normal Park Museum Magnet at Chattanooga Pre-K through 8th grade school for 14 years. She led the transformation of 2 low-performing schools into award-winning, innovative, exciting, and challenging places of learning. In 2012, Jill was recognized as the National Magnet Schools Principal of the Year. From 2013 to 2015, she served as the Obama administration as the first full-time Principal Ambassador Fellow at the U.S. Department of Education. In that capacity, she worked closely with Secretary Arne Duncan to increase the department's focus on the importance of school leadership. My amazing friends, thank you so much for joining me today. I can hardly wait to hear from you. And I know our audience is going to be awed by you. So let's start with the first question. And that is, how did you get interested in education and equity? And how did your experience of the Black and or Jewish communities motivate your involvement in education? Ardena, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Deborah, for having us, being a part of this discussion, and I am honored to be here. And one of the things that I could say is what I guess my life has been an equity lesson. I was looking back at the history of things going on in our country and in our world, and I was born 2 years after Brown versus Board of Education. And to think that I participated in the segregated schools in Hamilton County, Chattanooga. I went to both school systems. I had parents who were teachers in both systems. So I had an opportunity to experience Hamilton County's segregated system and experience the integrated system in 1970. That's interesting. The decision that separate but equal wasn't good happened 2 years before I was born, but I was a ninth grader before I actually went to an integrated school. Um, this is, I guess, what's always been interesting to me has been the fact that I used to think in the past. I appreciated my parents for being educators and wanting to educate people along the way. And then I found out that thinking about back in the early 50s when they started learning how to teach, they were teaching in these one-room schoolhouses that weren't a part of the regular school systems, but people were being educated. But that was kind of the beginning part that we could learn and we can learn. And equity is about understanding we may judge it differently, but everybody can learn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One room schoolhouses, huh? Jill, what do you have to say for us?
Well, I think my experience in thinking about educational equity goes back to when I was about 5, and my mother taught in a school called the Educational Opportunity Center. It was for adults who had left high school for various reasons, and she was trying to help to get them back on track. And she used to have certain milestones if they, completed certain things. She would take them to lunch and often would bring me along. So I got to meet a lot of people and hear their stories and kind of get this sense of, like the village that it takes to support people to get through their an education. When I graduated from college, I joined Teach for America, and I taught in the New Orleans public schools for 5 years. And what I found there was my students lived in the St. Thomas housing projects, which at the time was the second most violent in terms of gunshots and murders in New Orleans. And at the time, New Orleans had the highest murder rate in the country. The kids who were coming to my school were most in need of the best possible education. And in many cases, they were getting the worst. It was an old building, it wasn't air conditioned, it was run down. There weren't textbooks, there weren't resources, it wasn't right. And so I really, through my career, have tried to always think about that, to kind of right the wrongs of things that I felt that my students experienced back in the early 90s in New Orleans. You can fast forward to just the incredible experience of working in the Obama administration at the U.S. Department of Ed, which every meeting, the word equity was used multiple times, every single meeting. And this is the 7th floor, the top floor of the U.S. Department of Ed. So I call it like the 50,000-foot view. But as an educator there, I often didn't know if people really understood, like, what does that mean? Like, what does the nitty gritty of being in a school mean, and how do we expand opportunities for kids? So I've really tried to work as a district level person, as a principal, and in other ways to just expand opportunities, whether it's for extracurriculars or arts programs or science programs or reading or just all the other supports that kids need to be successful in school. And so that's just a little bit about my work in that area.
Oh, thank you. The two of you are reminding me that my own mother was a educator and became a principal of a Hebrew school. One of the things she really wanted to do was educate disadvantaged, disability children, people with neuroscience kind of issues especially. And I guess you absorb that kind of thing from a very young age as you guys have too, and it sticks with you for all your life. So let's go on to the next question, which is, what has education and equity looked like in the past? And what does it look like today? And I know we've talked about it a little bit, but why don't you expand on that? Ardena?
I thought about the question, and I remembered the 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 issue that I used to see growing up was that like I said, I came through the segregated school system, and when I remembered going to Udoa, part of me was going to was believing also in the part that if I was going to a school that wasn't um, 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 that was in a all black neighborhood with an all black school, there was something wrong with my education. And at some point in time, there was no idea of equity. It was kind of, we want to just get everything kind of in one row and one rail. So the issue was for me was that in the past for me there was no, this is going to be equitable, this is going to be fair. It was more like, hey, this is what government's requiring us to do. I have this flashback every time I watch Hidden Figures, where the judge is on the bench and he says, we don't do that Supreme Court stuff in Virginia. And and you kind of have this feeling there, all deliberate speed for Brown versus Board of Education meant, when you thought you were going to get sued and you did something a little different. um, I look at equity in the past and see communities that were like the community I'm living in now was somewhat diverse when new schools were being built. When Brainerd High School was the high school it was, and Dalewood High School was the high school it was, and these were mostly white students with white teachers. And as soon as Brown happened and some of the private schools opened up, you end up with white flight, but nobody measures that. So there's there was an idea that there was going to be education, free public education, but it looked like whatever government might allow to happen in neighborhoods. That, I think that's been part of the issue that I've been trying to deal with and understand that equity for that equity may have said that it wanted to have free and just and inclusive education, but what was happening with government sanctions and what was being followed, it did not include equity. So I can see it as some people wanting to do things right, but not understanding a lot of the issues with problems in school systems were systemic, and basically the system itself would create deficits and problems. Because I had teachers that were great teachers, and they ended up moving on to some of the more productive schools in the county, but the teachers that replaced them at the all black schools that I had were really different.
Wow, thank you. Interesting times. Yeah. So, Jill, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of to build on what Ardena said, and sadly, in a lot of ways, it's not all that different. Schools are still segregated. There's still disparity in facilities, offerings for kids. We look at where AP classes are offered, or theater programs, or things like that. It's different in different places. And so there's still, so much work to be done. You think about, what was it, 1968, that LBJ passed the legislation to create Title I and Office of Civil Rights. And, there's still just so much work to be done. And I guess some of the differences I would mention is one, the digital equity piece, which I will say, I feel like we've done a great job in Chattanooga, especially, COVID really kind of pushed us to do that. But here in our county, we're offering free Wi-Fi for 10 years for any student who qualifies for free lunch. So that means, thousands thousands of families that didn't have high-speed internet now have it because of the generosity of our community, quite frankly. So that's helped a lot with digital access. We also in our district increased teacher pay for this year. So in high needs areas, in critical subjects, the pay is 20% higher than a teacher in another school in the district, which is a lower needs area. So that will have an impact over time that I think could be really dramatic. But we're also facing, I think another thing, I guess there's always been pushback to the equity movement. I'm afraid I'll get a little political here, but this is the latest that's happening in our state around critical race theory. And, these statements that there are things we can't even teach. We can't teach kids about to kind of recognize and own their white privilege, for example. We can't sort of talk about the structures of our government that have kind of just propelled institutional racism. There are so many things like that it's really scary to me that legislation is going in place to keep people in a place instead of to help us move forward through the education system. And now teachers are grappling with how do I teach these really important concepts to kids in a way that doesn't get me in trouble? You know what I mean? And we've resolved that many of these things are in our state standards and we can still teach them, but there's a fear that's been created when we think about talking about race because of what's happening politically in our state. And I think that can be very, very dangerous. So I do feel like while we've made steps forward, there are also these other forces that kind of fear that progress and are pushing us backwards. And there's this just, clash right now, I think nationally, politically, that I see as very concerning. And I think that people are going to have to test it and do some bold things to stand up for what's right. Because if kids don't learn some of these concepts in school, where are they going to learn them?
And if I could add to what you're saying, Jill, one of the things that's real powerful, as I said, I've been kind of relearning some things about my own history, is that when I was taking this step back into my parents and the single room schools, I found this book called We Return Fighting. And it's about the veterans who went over to fight in World War I. And these people, these soldiers were educated in segregated one-room schoolhouses. And what they were taught was that the Constitution, they had rights under the Constitution. Now you have to understand, this is during the time after Reconstruction, everything, Jim Crow is taking off, but they thought enough of their country because of them as being citizens. And one of the things that I talked to a friend of my parents who was also teaching when they were, and he ended up being in the public school system in Georgia. He said, one of the things was that, it was a risk to being a teacher, and heaven forbid you join the NAACP. The neighborhoods in some of these southern towns knew what your mail was and knew what you were getting. So therefore you had, people think about the difficulty in teaching critical race theory. Think about these people who were potentially looking at getting lynched for getting people out of their places and making sure people didn't do what was safe for the community. So it's not old. It's something that happened in the past. It was a part of, how do you educate Black citizens who are not considered citizens, because a lot of rights were taken back after Reconstruction. So sometimes as we're dealing with what's happening with critical race theory, think about what happened after the president pulled back the soldiers out of the South, and everything just would say, hey, we've got the right to go back. I mean, sometimes you have to really wonder, there are certain people that don't believe that there was an end to the Civil War that um, change things for other people. So therefore, I just wanted to add to what you're saying. Yeah, I think it's really powerful to understand this isn't new. this is something we've been through before and we survived it, but we're also dealing with, this is 2022, and we're running into people who truly don't want to look at the big picture to understand what our country was really about.
And if you go even further back into history, as I do, and as growing up in Bermuda, it was a British colony, and that British
Colonialism.
empire approach, right, made sure that when I was growing up, schools, everything was deeply segregated. Even the movie theaters, everything was so much that way. And of course, Curb, the Bermudians who are looking at racism today are trying to unlock the systemic racism that was theirs. And I believe that we inherited some of that from the get-go in America. And it's a challenge, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you what are your goals to try and achieve, say, in the next 5 to 10 years in addressing these issues?
I want my goal is understanding that you've got to know the history. You've got to know the equity issues that were involved in the past. You've got to understand some of the government sanctioned issues that happened in the past. Um, and also learn those things. And as I was stating, right now I'm really finding my way through Ida B. Wells, her book, The Red Record, understanding that people in our community sometimes, the lynchings weren't saved just for protecting society and protecting property. Sometimes someone would get acquitted and a mob would get mad and just lynch someone who hadn't had the opportunity or had been acquitted by court. Also understanding that there is a history that we may not have appreciated or been able to be exposed to when we were in school, and understand we don't know everything, but if we can understand and look visibly, not at the end result. Don't look at the students who are in the low performing schools and say, why is that student? They have total responsibility for where they were. If that child or their child's parents, they don't have control over the books that are being bought. They don't have control over the budgets that are being set. They can't specifically, unless they move away from the system, but the people who are in the system aren't the ones that can make or break um, what the systemic issues are. So I think that part of my goal is approaching it from, when you're looking at educational equity, it's about equity. It's about understanding that we don't want to deal with the tyranny of the majority. We don't want to deal with social dominance. We need to make sure that if we're doing something, if we want to be proud of the people who are doing well, let's also have a heart for those who aren't doing well, because it's not all of their fault. It's not all that they've made to make happen. And we have to make sure that when we determine what is good or bad for the community, we don't say, hey, when you're coming to town, we don't want you to go to that school because that may not be. We don't need to have a barrier around it. We need to understand that there's more to equity than what a student's grade score is on a test.
Jill?
Yeah, for me, I mean, a couple goals. I would say one is to learn how to be a better advocate. And I'll give you an example. This past year, I spent 2 afternoons a week working in our local adult jail with students, with juveniles who are being tried with adult crimes, and just teaching them mostly math. I was trying to help to build their skills up. But obviously spending time with them, we talked a lot as well. And they're in an incredibly tough situation as teenagers in an adult jail where they're getting no outdoor rec time. They're eating their meals in their cell. I mean, it's a devastating situation on many levels. And I really struggled with trying to figure out how to advocate for them without kind of causing major disruption, where, and kind of figuring out like, what is my place to be helpful. But as I talked to the boys, I also learned a lot about their backgrounds and kind of the way that society had failed them on so many different levels, from, being homeless, being in so many different schools, being suspended so many times, all of these things that that I think, had they been white, might have been different. And if they were white, I don't think that they would be in an adult jail awaiting trial. I mean, they haven't even been convicted, and they've been in jail for over a year. And one had no lawyer for many, many months, and so it's almost a risk sort of putting that out there, but I just think, like, if you care, you have to figure out how to advocate. And that's been a challenge for me, is to kind of figure out, like, how can I be the best advocate for kids long term and in our community as a whole. And then for me, secondly, I just actually moved to a principal position. And part of that was because I enjoyed so much working with these boys for the past year that I wanted to be back in the school and be with kids again. But my school right now is not as diverse as it could be. And it's a performing arts magnet school. And so we've already written some grants to figure out how we can recruit in some of our higher needs schools, how we can run audition workshops for kids to help build kind of like the social capital for how you get into a school like this, if you don't have maybe parents at home that are helping you to prepare with headshots and resumes and things like that. So I think my goals are kind of twofold, just to kind of be a better community member and advocate, and then also to help to expand really great educational opportunities for more kids in more diverse communities.
Thank you. How wonderful. Goodness. So, and what do you think is the biggest challenge that you're going to be facing? Ardena, what do you think?
People thinking that if they aren't doing well, it's their fault. People believing that the victim or the person who is different from them has done something wrong, or their relatives have done something wrong to prevent them from being where they are. And part of my goal right now is I am I've fought, and I've gone through a lot of changes dealing with people trying to convince them that um, that there's some places, like Jill, you were talking about in the court system. I have a really big problem right now with, especially what's going on with what happened on January 6th and what's going on other people's level. I'm looking at a guy who is serving 20 years in federal prison, and there was no gun, no one was killed. He just kept getting into trouble. And then if he had been white, I'm reading the words that the judge said to him. Like, he took into consideration even stuff that had been dismissed and wasn't on this guy's record. He was telling this person about how he was going to deal with things. So therefore, part of my approach is understanding America is beautiful. America has a lot of great things that are going on with it, but America has some baggage. And until it's willing to understand that that you start from the baggage part, some of the things, like even when you get to the ACEs issue, where everybody's talking about adolescent issues, trauma going on with children, you don't always ask, why is Johnny bad? You ask, what's happened to Johnny. That's part of the issue that I'm dealing with. Some of the things you have to deal with. Some people just say, hey, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, you need to pull yourself up. No, we've got to go bigger picture. We've got to go back further. We've got to understand that, yes, there were times in this country that, even one of the things that really kind of has even blown me away even more was reading about the Chinese Exclusion Act, understanding what people were doing to the Chinese people. And we have laws and court cases that have rulings that we wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for Chinese people challenging what was going on. Even cases they lost, they were still saying, hey, let me keep coming back to court and let me understand that, I am going to, I am a person who deserves all the rights and liberties of someone being in America. And even though you want to exclude me specifically because of my nationality, according to the Constitution, it does include me. That came from the Chinese Exclusion Act, not from the 19th Amendment. But I think that's the one I wanted to use. But basically, just making sure that people understand equity is a big picture. There's an effect in education, but let's talk about equity and the problems that that are brought not through any control of any one person that's coming forth that has to be judged on how they're dealing, but understand we've got some issues that are being documented. We can read about it in the past, but we need to teach ourselves what our history is.
Yeah. And I'd like to add to that as an urban planner in the past, right, we have seen metropolitan areas in particular segregate, and that segregation lasts and still is influencing us today. So the equity is very difficult geography as well as the education. It all blends together. So how are we going to fix that all, Jill?
Well, I'm like the smallest, tiniest piece and trying to contribute. I mean, just this conversation, listening to Ardena I just need like 3 more hours to listen to you talk, but she's way more articulate than I am. But I do think like we have to own the inequity before we can really move on to promoting equity in some ways. And I think that's a huge challenge. In so many ways, people are just so afraid to just acknowledge how inequitable things are in our community or in our nation. And so I think that's a start. And then I think also that the piece that Ardena said about just like, there are so many factors that kind of cause someone to be where they are. And then so many things, different supports that different people need to kind of get on a better trajectory. And we just have to be really sensitive and mindful to that and not just make assumptions about people being where they are because of where they are, I guess. I didn't say that well, but
Yeah.
So, there's just lots of work to be done. And Deborah, I meant to mention this sooner. My husband's grandfather was a Jewish man in Chattanooga, as I'm sure you know, a state legislator. When he ran for judge, he was in a runoff and started to receive threatening calls from the KKK saying that they would firebomb his house and kill his children if he didn't drop out of the race. Of course, that was back, many, many years ago. But I was thinking about this because I know this is a Jewish Black dialogue podcast, right? I mean, I do think that there are kind of some similarities in treatment of people that should be discussed and kind of identified as well, so that people from different groups can come together to advocate for equity as well.
Absolutely, and this hasn't gone away because when I was the executive director of the Jewish Federation here, we also had threats of the same kind. And even as the editor of the American Diversity Report, I have personally received death threats. This isn't an easy environment for us, and I commend both of you for your courage in moving forward on this, because I know that it's nerve-wracking and it's difficult and the challenges are many. And the opportunities not as many as we'd like. But thank you for doing all that you do and sharing it with us today. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered
I just want to add, just be mindful when when you have a question about why is this community different or why aren't people succeeding, please don't punish the students. The students who are coming through you I think it's made to sound really good. They're priority schools to say they need special effort, but there was history in there's other things that weren't done that caused some of these needs to happen. So therefore, let's look back at what didn't happen, or what happened when, because one of the things when you're looking at what was written by Black authors after Reconstruction, there was this desire that you need to be good enough so that white men would not be upset with what you were doing or how you were trying to succeed. And that brings me back to Tulsa. My daughter graduated from there, and we've really gotten into those issues. Those Black people could not be good enough no matter what they did. They were not going to be good enough for the white people that were around them at the time. So therefore, we have to understand, there's some choices and we all have to make decisions, but understand that let's look at the history and not just blame the person that may be in the middle of something for where they are or how they're being judged.
And let's remind our audience about Tulsa and the Black Wall Street massacre in the
Yes.
1920s, and that you should look it up. Important
Yes.
history. Thank you. Jill, anything you'd like to add?
I think, no, I don't think I have anything else to add. I think Ardena summed it up really well. So.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate you taking the time, and we will share this with our audience.
And you are making me write what I haven't talked about. You want me to write more.
Yes,
I appreciate the effort, Deborah, and the push.
yes. And audience, if you have articles you'd like to write about this topic, you can go onto the AmericanDiversityReport.com and look at the submission guidelines. We urge you to do that. We are very open and welcoming to people who have something important to share about making a difference in this world and changing it for the better, making it more equitable, and giving us the opportunity, right, to grow, improve, and make this country an even better one. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ardena and Jill, and audience. Hope the two of you will stay on, but I'm going to finish us up now.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.